Corruption. It's like that weird smell in your grandma's attic. Well, today we're throwing open that attic door and shining a disinfecting light on the stinkiest corners of global corruption. From rigged elections to government officials treating public funds like their own personal piggy banks, we're diving deep into the countries where corruption isn't just a problem, it's practically a national sport. Buckle up, folks, because we're about to take a whirlwind tour of the top 10 most corrupt countries in the world. Venezuela. Once upon a time, this South American nation was swimming in oil money, a shimmering beacon of prosperity in a region often plagued by poverty. Now, well, imagine a once luxurious cruise ship that's been run aground by a crew of drunken pirates who also happen to be terrible at managing money. You see, Venezuela's government officials seem to have taken the phrase, "living your best life," a bit too literally. While everyday citizens struggle to afford basic necessities like food and medicine, those in power have been accused of siphoning off billions of dollars into their own pockets. We're talking mansions, yachts, private jets, the whole 9 yards of corrupt luxury. Need a government document processed? Slip a little something extra to the clerk? Want to avoid getting pulled over by the police? A crisp bill tucked into your license will do the trick. Hyperinflation has rendered the Venezuelan bolivar practically worthless, and people are literally starving in the streets. Next up, we travel to the land of secretive dictators, questionable haircuts, and enough propaganda to make even the most devoted Fox News viewer blush: North Korea. Now you might think that a country run by a regime that's basically a real-life parody of a totalitarian state wouldn't have much room for corruption. But oh, how wrong you'd be. You see, in North Korea, corruption isn't just a bug in the system, it's the system. Want to get a decent job? Better have a well-connected uncle willing to grease the wheels with a hefty bribe. Dreaming of escaping the drudgery of farm life and moving to the luxurious capital city of Pyongyang? Prepare to fork over a small fortune to the right officials. Since the government controls pretty much every aspect of the economy, smuggling and illegal trade are rampant. It's a system so corrupt, so utterly devoid of transparency and accountability, that it makes your average banana republic look like a shining beacon of democracy. Haiti, a beautiful Caribbean nation with a rich history and culture, could be a tropical paradise. Instead, it's trapped in a seemingly endless cycle of poverty and instability, thanks in no small part to rampant corruption. Imagine this: you're a Haitian citizen struggling to rebuild your life after a devastating earthquake. International aid pours in, billions of dollars pledged to help Haiti recover and rebuild. But instead of reaching those who need it most, the money disappears into a black hole of government corruption. Contracts are awarded based on kickbacks, not merit. Funds meant for infrastructure projects end up lining the pockets of politicians and their cronies. Organized crime has infiltrated every level of Haitian society, further fueling the cycle of corruption and violence. The result? Haiti remains one of the poorest countries in the Western Hemisphere, its people trapped in a cycle of poverty and despair. Number 6 is Syria, war and corruption, a toxic mix. Syria, a nation ravaged by years of brutal civil war, offers a chilling example of how corruption thrives in times of chaos and conflict. When a country is torn apart by violence, the rule of law often crumbles, creating fertile ground for corruption to flourish. Imagine a war-torn landscape where government officials, rebel groups, and even humanitarian organizations are all vying for control and resources. In this chaotic environment, bribery, extortion, and theft become the norm. Government officials, desperate to maintain their grip on power, siphon off funds meant for the war effort or use their positions to enrich themselves through illicit deals. Rebel groups, seeking to fund their fight against the government, resort to kidnapping, looting, and smuggling. In Syria, corruption isn't just a side effect of war, it's become an integral part of the conflict itself, perpetuating the cycle of violence and suffering that has gripped the nation for over a decade. Number 5. Sudan, dictatorship's grip on power and wealth. Sudan, a nation scarred by decades of dictatorship and military rule, stands as a stark reminder that corruption isn't just about stealing money, it's about maintaining power at any cost. For years, Sudan was ruled by Omar al-Bashir, a dictator who used corruption as a tool to enrich himself and his cronies while brutally suppressing any opposition. Under al-Bashir's iron fist, Sudan became a textbook example of kleptocracy, a government ruled by thieves. Government funds were treated like the dictator's personal piggy bank, with billions of dollars siphoned off into offshore accounts, while basic services like healthcare and education crumbled. Bribery became a way of life, necessary for everything from obtaining a business permit to avoiding arrest. Next is Yemen, war, famine, and the price of corruption. Yemen, a nation ravaged by years of civil war and a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions, offers a heartbreaking glimpse into the human cost of corruption. In a country where millions face starvation and disease, corruption isn't just a crime, it's a death sentence. Imagine a country where government officials, rebel groups, and even aid organizations are all implicated in a web of corruption that diverts desperately needed aid from those who need it most. Government officials, driven by greed and self-preservation, steal or withhold food aid, using it as a weapon to control populations or line their own pockets. Rebel groups, seeking to fund their fight, loot aid convoys or impose illegal taxes on humanitarian supplies. In Yemen, corruption is a matter of life and death. It's the difference between a child receiving life-saving food and medicine or starving to death. Now our index takes us to Africa's Equatorial Guinea, a small nation on the west coast of Africa, is a textbook example of the resource curse in action. Despite being awash in oil wealth, the majority of its citizens live in poverty, while the ruling elite live like royalty. Why? Because corruption, my friends, is a hell of a drug. Imagine a country where the president's family treats the national treasury like their own personal bank account. That's Equatorial Guinea, where President Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, in power for over 40 years, and his family have amassed obscene wealth while their people struggle to survive. We're talking mansions, super yachts, private jets, luxury cars, you name it, they've probably bought it. And with your money, essentially. Meanwhile, basic services like healthcare and education are practically non-existent for most Equatorial Guineans. Next is Afghanistan, graft, and instability, a vicious cycle. Afghanistan, a nation ravaged by decades of war and instability, has become synonymous with corruption. It's a country where bribes are as commonplace as handshakes, where government officials are seen as predators rather than public servants, and where billions of dollars in international aid have vanished into thin air. Imagine a system where you need a bribe to get anything done, from obtaining a driver's license to securing a government contract. That's the reality in Afghanistan, where corruption has become so deeply entrenched that it's practically part of the national DNA. Government officials, from low-level bureaucrats to high-ranking ministers, treat their positions as opportunities for personal enrichment. Bribes, kickbacks, and extortion are the norm, with little to no accountability for those who engage in such practices. Over the past 2 decades, billions of dollars have poured into Afghanistan, much of it intended to rebuild the country's shattered infrastructure and institutions. But a significant portion of that aid has been lost to corruption, siphoned off by corrupt officials, warlords, and contractors. Number 2 on the list is South Sudan, a nation born in corruption. South Sudan, the world's youngest nation, offers a tragic example of how corruption can cripple a country from the moment of its birth. Born out of a long and bloody struggle for independence, South Sudan had the potential to be a beacon of hope for the region. Instead, it's become a cautionary tale of what happens when corruption is allowed to fester unchecked. Imagine a country where, just a few years after gaining independence, its leaders are accused of stealing billions of dollars in oil revenue. That's South Sudan, where corruption is so pervasive that it's crippled the country's ability to provide even the most basic services to its citizens. From the highest levels of government to the lowest rungs of the bureaucracy, corruption is a fact of life in South Sudan. And finally, the country which topped the list of most corrupt rank is Somalia, anarchy, and the price of lawlessness. And now, we arrive at the bottom of the barrel, the grand champion of corruption, the nation that makes even the most jaded cynic question the very nature of humanity, Somalia. For over 3 decades, Somalia has been synonymous with anarchy, piracy, and yes, you guessed it, rampant corruption. Imagine a country where there's no functioning central government, where warlords and militias control vast swaths of territory, and where the rule of law is nothing more than a distant memory. That's Somalia, a nation where corruption isn't just a problem, it's the operating system. Warlords and militias extort money from businesses and civilians alike, using the proceeds to fund their armed groups and enrich themselves. Piracy, once a scourge of the Somali coast, was fueled by corruption, with officials often turning a blind eye to the pirates' activities in exchange for a cut of the profits. Even humanitarian aid, intended to alleviate the suffering of the Somali people, often falls prey to corruption. Aid workers face threats, intimidation, and extortion from armed groups, while corrupt officials skim off the top or divert aid to their own supporters. Outro: can they escape the corruption trap? So there you have it, a whirlwind tour of the world's most corrupt countries. It's enough to make you want to crawl into a bunker with a lifetime supply of canned goods and never come out. But before you do, let's take a moment to remember that corruption isn't inevitable. It's a human problem, and like all human problems, it can be solved. It takes courage, determination, and a collective effort from citizens, governments, and the international community. It's a long and arduous journey, but it's a journey we must take if we want to create a world where everyone, regardless of where they live, has the opportunity to thrive.